Have you ever caught yourself thinking that your love is no longer love, but service? That the more you give yourself to another, the emptier and more unrecognizable you become to yourself? You called it devotion, but this is not a story about generosity. This is a story about disappearance. To understand this destructive mechanism, we will not rely on dry theory. We will conduct a real psychological investigation. Under a microscope, we will examine one painfully real story of a man. Let's call him Ethan. He loved so much that he erased himself from the map of his own life, and his story will become our map to the truth. In his story, you will see why your energy runs out even when you do everything right. You will learn what invisible, ancient force you unconsciously feed with your self-sacrifice. And you will understand the first, most important step you must take to return yourself to the center of your own universe. If you are ready to see the truth behind the illusion of perfect love, our investigation begins now. So let me introduce you to Ethan. Before meeting Mia, his life could be described in one word: reliability. He was that quiet, calm center around which other people's dramas revolved. Friends called him after painful breakups. Colleagues entrusted him with the most difficult projects. Ethan was a harbor where other ships came to wait out the storm, but his own ship seemed never to leave the pier. He was a good guy, empathetic and kind, but in the silence of his apartment, there echoed a deep sense of unrealized potential. He felt like a secondary character in his own story, and in the depths of his soul yawned a void shaped like a calling. And then Mia appeared. She didn't enter his life. She burst into it like a gust of summer wind into a stuffy room. She was not just a woman, she was a clot of life, a supernova of desires, dreams, and ambitions. Where Ethan was silence, she was music. Where he was order, she was delightful chaos. Their meeting was not just an acquaintance, but a chemical reaction. His deep need to be needed collided with her boundless capacity to want. In the depths of his soul there was a void, and when he met Mia, that void finally took on her face. Their romance began like a fairy tale written for adults disillusioned with fairy tales. Ethan finally found his mission. He became the architect of her happiness, the engineer of her comfort, the silent executor of her every unspoken wish. He anticipated her fatigue and ordered dinner. He heard her fleeting admiration for a dress in a shop window and bought it the next day. In return, he received the most precious treasure, her admiration. In her eyes, he was not just a good guy. He was a knight, a hero, a magician. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt irreplaceable. He wasn't building a life with her, he was building a life for her, and in that tiny preposition lay his entire future tragedy. Their idyll was woven from hundreds of such moments of service, each of which seemed like an act of great love. But one of them, like a thin crack in porcelain, foretold everything that would happen later. Ethan had been living with his project for several weeks. It wasn't just work, it was his chance. A chance to get a promotion, to prove to himself and the world that he wasn't just a good guy, but a professional, a force to be reckoned with. The presentation was scheduled for Friday morning. On Thursday evening, he sat in front of the screen, refining the final details, feeling adrenaline mixed with the anticipation of victory. It was at that moment that Mia walked in. She hugged him from behind and, looking at the screen, casually said, "You know, I just saw photos of the coast. How I would love to wake up tomorrow morning and see the ocean." It wasn't a request, it was just a thought set afloat. But to Ethan, it sounded like a royal decree. In her words, he saw not a dream, but an assignment. A moment later, his project was minimized to a tiny icon in the corner of the screen. All night, to the hum of the sleeping city, Ethan stayed awake. He looked for tickets, booked a hotel with an ocean view, planned the perfect route. In the morning, instead of going to the most important meeting of his career, he handed her an envelope. Her delight was blinding, like a flash. Her kisses were his reward. His project, of course, was botched. He mumbled something incoherent at the meeting, losing the thread of the narrative and the trust of management. But on the way to the coast, looking at Mia's happy face, he convinced himself that he had done the right thing. That morning, he traded a brick from the foundation of his life for her fleeting smile. And that deal seemed to him the most profitable in the world. But such deals always have a deferred price. Fast forward a few years. The picture we see is stripped of fairy tale shine. Late evening. The cold light of the kitchen lamp picks Ethan out of the darkness, sitting at the table all alone. He is dead tired, but this fatigue is not from a productive day. It is from barren existence. The silence in the house is thick as ash. Mia is in another room. Between them there are not meters, but an icy wall of silent disappointment. Instead of admiration, he now hears snippets of her conversations with friends, full of comparisons to other, more successful men. Instead of passion, polite indifference. There is no intimacy. His bank account is slowly emptying, reflecting his inner depletion. His career is frozen at the very point where he first chose her smile over his future. He looks at his hands, the very hands that built her happiness, and he doesn't understand. I gave her everything, every minute, every cent, every ambition. Why do I feel not like a hero, but like a servant? Why am I not the king in my castle, but a ghost wandering through my own home? The fairy tale ended. And only the main question remained, hanging in the air like an unpaid bill. How did a knight ready for anything turn into a shadow? To answer this question, we must set aside emotions and put on an analyst's gloves. Ethan's story is not just a series of unfortunate decisions. It is a clinical picture with clear, interconnected symptoms. Let's lay the evidence out on the table. The first and most obvious symptom, compulsive service. Note, we are not saying kindness or care. We are saying compulsive. That is, obsessive, uncontrollable. Ethan's behavior is not the free choice of a generous person. It is the reflex of a dependent. He didn't just want to make Mia happy. He was pathologically unable to tolerate her slightest displeasure. Every guest's desire was for him not an act of love, but a dose that relieved anxiety. He didn't gift her his energy. He paid it as tribute to an invisible fear. The fear of being unnecessary. The fear of being rejected. His service was not strength, but a symptom of deep weakness. The second symptom, professional powerlessness and financial collapse. This is not an accident and not a separate problem. It is a direct consequence of the first symptom. Imagine that a man's life force, his drive, his logos, is a powerful river. For Ethan, that entire river was diverted from the channel of his career and ambitions to irrigate, to the last drop, the little garden of Mia's desires. His professional world did not just stop developing, it began to die of drought. The energy he should have invested in projects, negotiations, in building his empire, went entirely to scanning her mood and fulfilling her whims. His financial collapse is merely the material reflection of his spiritual bankruptcy. The third symptom, transformation of the partner. It is extremely important to understand. Mia was not a mommy tyrant from the very beginning. She became one. This is not her original essence, but a role Ethan himself unconsciously hired her for. Constantly seeking her approval, refusing to make his own decisions, transferring to her the responsibility for his happiness, he himself seated her on the throne of the all-powerful mother. And nature abhors a vacuum. When a man abandons his inner throne, someone else occupies it. Her criticism and control are a desperate, albeit destructive, attempt by her psyche to force him to grow up, to become an equal. And finally, the fourth symptom, the sexual desert. The fading of desire on both sides is not life getting in the way. It is the logical finale of this psychological drama. Sexual energy between a man and a woman requires polarity, requires two separate, sovereign centers. It cannot exist in the dynamic of good boy and controlling mom. It becomes psychologically incestuous, and the soul instinctively recoils from that. Pop psychology would call this toxic relationships, but that's like calling a fire a too warm place. That's a description, not an explanation. It doesn't tell us what fuel is burning and who lit the match. To understand the cause, we must look deeper. So what is this force that ties all these symptoms together? What invisible conductor makes all the actors in this drama, Ethan, Mia, his career, and his libido, play the same destructive script? Everyday explanations are powerless. But Jungian psychology gives this force a very precise name. Ethan's story is not a story of a failed relationship. It is a textbook case of what Carl Jung called the negative mother complex. Let's decode this diagnosis. It means that Ethan, as an adult man, at the deepest unconscious level is not seeking a woman partner, but the great mother. He is not building a union of two equal, sovereign individuals. He is desperately trying to recreate and hold on to the primary infantile bond in which he is the good boy and she is the omnipotent maternal figure, the source of safety, approval, and life itself. His currency is not love, but obedience. His goal is not intimacy, but fusion. He does not want to be loved for who he is. He wants to be irreplaceable in his service so that he is never left. His tragedy is the tragedy of psychological incest. Let me be perfectly clear. This is not about a physical act, but about the deepest spiritual and psychological process. It is the inability of the son to separate from the all-consuming maternal figure, to leave her psychological womb and be born as an independent person. It is living with an uncut psychological umbilical cord through which all his life energy flows to the woman, leaving him empty and powerless. Ethan's tragedy is not the tragedy of love, but the tragedy of a psychological birth that never took place. And this one diagnosis, like a master key, opens all the locks we saw earlier. His compulsive service, it is the eternal attempt of the good boy to earn mother's smile. His career collapse, it is the symbolic castration perpetrated by the devouring mother to keep the son under her power, away from the world of men, the world of logos and achievement. Mia's transformation into a tyrant? She is merely dutifully playing the role of the great mother that he himself forced on her by abandoning the adult position. And the death of desire? It is the instinctive horror of the soul before the violation of the oldest taboo. Ethan is not fighting Mia. He is fighting an archetype, the shadow of the great mother living inside him. And until this demon is called by name, it is invincible. This diagnosis, negative mother complex, may seem abstract, academic. But this complex has a voice, and I am sure many of you have heard it. And here at this point, Ethan's story ceases to be just a story. It becomes a mirror. Look into it. Listen to the silence within yourself. Do you hear the whisper of this complex in your life? That very quiet, convincing voice that says, "Make her happy, and then you will be safe." A voice that insists her calm is your main task, and her smile is the only true measure of your success. Do you recognize this inner arithmetic, where her comfort always outweighs your ambitions? Where her "I want" instantly becomes your "I must"? Where her fleeting desire easily cancels your months-long plans? This is a quiet but merciless logic that makes you postpone your life until later, because now always belongs to her. Is this deep, irrational sense of guilt familiar to you when you do something for yourself? When you go to meet friends, pursue your hobby, or just want to be alone, and anxiety rises inside as if you are betraying something sacred? These are not just thoughts. This is an entire internal operating system stitched into the deepest layers of your psyche. It runs in the background, governing your decisions, your priorities, and your allocation of energy. It is a voice that promises you the paradise of unconditional love and acceptance. But the price of entry to that paradise is your own life. And as long as you mistake this whisper for the voice of love or duty, you remain a prisoner. A prisoner not of a woman, but of a complex that speaks with her mouth. If you recognize this voice, know this. You are dealing not with personal weakness, but with one of the most powerful forces acting in the male psyche. This mother complex is not just a psychological quirk. It is a titan. It is an ancient energy that, depending on how a man engages with it, can either elevate him to the heights or castrate him, depriving him of power. In its positive aspect, it gives a man empathy, the ability to care, intuition, the capacity to build deep bonds. It is the source of his soul. But in its negative shadow aspect, which we see in Ethan's story, this very same force becomes destructive. It engulfs, suffocates, deprives of will, and turns a man into an eternal son, unable to become the hero of his own life. It promises the safety of the cradle, but this cradle over time turns into a prison and then into a grave for his spirit. Ethan, like many, fell under the shadow of this titan. To understand how he fell into this trap, and much more importantly, how to find a way out, we must go beyond his personal story. We must plunge into Carl Jung's teaching about one of the most ancient and fundamental forces in the human psyche, the archetype of the Great Mother. This is not an academic exercise. It is a vital necessity, because you cannot defeat an enemy whose map you do not have. You cannot get out of a labyrinth without understanding its architecture. And now we will descend into the deepest archives of the soul to obtain this map. We must understand the anatomy of this force, see its two faces, the light and the dark, so as to learn to separate one from the other. We are heading to the source, to the first cause, to an understanding of how this great and terrible force that shapes a man's destiny works. So what is this archetype of the Great Mother? To understand this, forget academic terms for a moment. An archetype is not an idea someone came up with. It is an innate instinctive pattern, a primordial program stitched into the collective unconscious of humanity. It is psychic DNA, and the archetype of the Great Mother is the earliest, oldest, and most powerful of these patterns because it reflects our very first experience, the experience of total dependence on the force that gives birth to us, nourishes us, and protects us. This archetype, like an ancient goddess, has two faces. And the first face is the Good Mother. Imagine her as nature itself. She is the fertile soil that gives harvest. She is the quiet harbor where a ship can shelter from the storm. She is the source of milk and honey, a symbol of unconditional love and acceptance. Her embrace is safety. Her voice whispers, "You are loved. You belong to this world. Everything will be okay." In Jungian psychology, she represents the principle of eros, the force of connection, union, warmth. To receive her gift in childhood is to build a solid foundation for one's personality. Without this gift, the soul remains forever hungry and insecure. This is the paradise we all come from, but this goddess also has another terrifying face. This is the terrible mother. If the Good Mother is fertile earth, the terrible mother is a bog that sucks you in. If the first is a harbor, the second is a suffocating embrace from which it is impossible to escape. She is the spider who weaves a web of control. She is the sarcophagus that promises eternal peace, but is in fact a grave for the spirit. Her methods are engulfment, domination, and symbolically, castration. This is not a physical act, but the castration of will, ambition, a man's connection with the outer world. She says, "Don't go. The world is dangerous. Stay with me. Only I know what's best for you. Without me, you are nothing." In mythology, these are images of the goddess Kali with a necklace of skulls, or the witch who lures children into a gingerbread house to eat them. And it is here, at the border of these two faces, that the greatest drama in a man's life unfolds. His psychological task as a hero is not to kill the mother. It is to perform two great acts. First, to accept the gift of the Good Mother, her love, her warmth, her basic sense of safety. And then, and this is the hardest, to break free from her embrace in time so as not to be engulfed by the terrible mother. He must leave the Garden of Paradise to go into the world and become himself. A man's psychological birth is the act of separation from the maternal archetype. She is both the cradle in which life is born and the grave to which everything returns. And a man's entire fate plays out between these two poles of hers. This eternal myth of the hero leaving home and the dragon that holds him back is staged not on ancient Olympus, but in our bedrooms and kitchens. Let us see how this great drama manifested in Ethan's life. Mia, like any woman in the life of a man captured by this complex, became an involuntary screen for his unconscious projections. He did not see her as real. He saw in her the reflection of the two faces of the Great Mother. At the beginning of their romance, she was for him the embodiment of the Good Mother. Her admiration was that very milk and honey that nourished his depleted self-esteem. Her desires gave him a mission, filling his inner emptiness with meaning. He did not just love her. He fed on her. Her happiness was his psychological food, and at this stage their union seemed perfect because it fully matched the archetypal scenario: the caring, nourishing mother and the grateful, adoring son. He found his paradise. But Ethan made the fatal mistake that thousands of men make. He refused the hero's journey. Instead of accepting the gift of the good mother, her faith in him, her love, and using it as fuel to go into the world and build his own kingdom, he decided to stay in her kingdom forever. He decided that the goal of the journey was not the outer world, but she herself. And the moment he refused psychological separation, he unconsciously summoned the second dark face of the archetype. The psyche does not tolerate stagnation. If the son refuses to leave voluntarily, the terrible mother comes to push him out by force. This is exactly what we see next. Her growing criticism, her control, her constant dissatisfaction. These are the suffocating embraces of the terrible mother. This is her way of saying, "You are still a boy, you can't cope, you are weak." And his financial collapse and professional powerlessness are the direct consequence of symbolic castration. At the moment he abandoned his project for her fleeting desire, he performed a ritual act. He sacrificed his logos, his connection to the world of masculine achievements, on the altar of her eros, her world of feelings and desires. He handed her his sword, and she, as the myth demands, deprived him of power to keep him by her side. And here we come to the most important thing. Mia was not a monster. She was an actress who merely dutifully played the role he unconsciously handed her, the role of the terrible mother, whose task is either to engulf the son or, through pain and suffering, finally force him to become a man. His prison was not built by her, but by himself, from the bricks of his own fear of growing up. And Ethan's tragedy is not a unique case. It is a universal law for any man who has not passed this key stage of psychological initiation. Understand the main point. For a man captured by the negative mother complex, any woman becomes a screen for the projection of the mother. He cannot see her as a separate, real person with her own strengths and weaknesses. Instead, he sees one of two figures, either the goddess or the witch, either the good mother or the terrible one. At the beginning of the relationship, he projects the image of the goddess onto her. He worships her. He idealizes her. He puts her on a pedestal and is ready to give everything to serve her. He does not love her. He deifies her. He seeks in her not a partner, but a savior who will finally give him the sense of wholeness and meaning he lacks. But pedestals exist to be fallen from. As soon as the real woman reveals her imperfections, her dissatisfaction, her own needs that do not fit his ideal image, the projection flickers and changes. The goddess turns into the witch. The good mother becomes terrible. And then he begins to fear her. He fears her anger, her criticism, her silence. Her dissatisfaction is experienced by him not as the opinion of an equal partner, but as a threat of total annihilation, as excommunication from the source of life. There can be no equality in such a dynamic. He either worships her from below or fears her from below. He never stands with her, shoulder to shoulder. He cannot be in alliance with her because he is still in the nursery. And that is why in such relationships, sex always, sooner or later, dies. The psyche does not allow incest. You cannot truly desire the one from whom you expect maternal protection and approval. You cannot feel adult, predatory passion for someone whose dissatisfaction evokes in you a child's horror. You cannot be both lover and son at the same time. Sooner or later, the psyche will force you to choose. And if you unconsciously choose the role of the son, sexual energy disappears because it is displaced by a more ancient and powerful dynamic, the dynamic of child and parent. Therefore, here is a clear marker for self-diagnosis. If your relationship is dominated by either blind worship or irrational fear, you are not in a union of two adults. You are trapped in an archetype. This truth can be painful. To realize that you are trapped by an archetypal force is heavy knowledge. But awareness is the first step to freedom. And to make this step more real, more tangible, I will ask you to do a small but very important exercise in honesty. Right now. Your soul keeps precise books. Every deal, every compromise, every sacrifice. All this is recorded in its great ledger. And now I ask you to open this book and read the final sum of your debt to yourself. Pause for a moment and ask yourself one question. Be perfectly honest. No one but you will hear it. The question is, what price am I paying for approval in my relationships? This is not an abstract question. The price is always concrete. Let's go through the expense items. What have you already given away? Maybe it's your hobbies? That guitar gathering dust in the corner? Those mountain hikes for which there is never time? That workshop whose keys you no longer remember where they are? These were not just hobbies. These were territories of your soul to which you voluntarily closed the entrance. And what about your friends? The very ones with whom you could talk for hours, who knew you before her. You see them less and less because she doesn't like them, or because every hour not spent with her feels like betrayal. You traded your tribe for the approval of one person? Look at your ambitions. That risky but exciting business project you postponed because it demanded too much energy. That promotion you didn't fight for to avoid conflict at home. That dream of moving to another city which was buried under the pretext, she is more comfortable here. And now the most important thing, your dreams and principles. Those quiet, deep convictions about what kind of man you want to be. How many times did you keep silent when you wanted to speak? How many times did you agree when everything inside you screamed no? How many small betrayals of yourself did you commit to keep the peace? And now I ask you to take a second step. Scroll down to the comments section, and without naming names, without going into unnecessary details that could reveal you, answer one question. What is the biggest compromise with yourself you have made to remain a good boy? And understand, the goal of this action is not complaint. It is not to present yourself as a victim. It is the first act of returning your own truth to yourself. To call your sacrifice by name is to stop pretending it didn't happen. To write about it is to bring it out of the dark basement of your subconscious into the light. Reading the comments of others, you will see that you are not alone. You will see that you belong to a vast, silent brotherhood of men fighting the same battle. And this knowledge is the beginning of your liberation. And when you see this price, when you read in the comments dozens of stories about lost hobbies, friends, and ambitions, one thing becomes obvious. The war with the outer world is already lost. The real battle, the only one that can be won, is happening inside. Ethan's first, most natural impulse, and perhaps yours, is to blame Mia, to see in her the cause of all misfortunes, a tyrant, an abuser, the one who ruined his life. This path seems logical. It gives a simple explanation and a clear enemy. But it's a trap. It is a road to nowhere. By blaming her, he only continues to play the same childish game. Mom is bad. She hurts me. He remains in the position of the victim, in the position of a child who complains about an omnipotent parent. This is a path that guarantees the eternal repetition of the same scenario, possibly with different actresses, but with the same tragic finale. Understand the key truth of the Jungian approach. Mia is only an actress whom his unconscious hired for the role of the terrible mother. She is not the author of this play, she is only the performer. And who is the author? He himself. His unhealed mother complex wrote this script and conducted the casting. And he hired her not to destroy him, but to, through unbearable pain, finally force him to wake up. Her criticism is the alarm clock he set for himself, but now refuses to hear. Therefore, his real task is not to argue with the actress, not to try to remake her, and not to look for another, better actress for the same role. His task is to perform the great act of psychological separation, to stop being a son and become a man. And this is not about the age in your passport. You can be a gray-haired CEO and still remain a psychological son. To become a man means to stop seeking the source of your value, safety, and meaning in a woman's approval. It means finding that source within yourself. This is the second, true birth. And it, unlike the first, requires conscious courage and always happens in solitude. Your task is not to fire the actress. Your task is to rewrite the script in which you yourself assign yourself the role of the eternal son and victim. You must take the pen from her and become the author of your own story. Your main battle is not with her. It is with the part of you that is desperately afraid to grow up. But what does it mean to become a man from the perspective of depth psychology? It is not just a decision made by sheer willpower. It is an alchemical process. It is the construction within yourself of the structure you desperately lack. If the negative mother complex immerses a man in the world of eros, a world of fusion, feelings, irrational bonds, and dissolution, then the antidote to this suffocating ocean is the integration of the opposite principle, the principle of logos. In the Jungian tradition, this is symbolically called the father principle, and here it is crucial to understand. This is not about your real father. He may have been wonderful or terrible, present or absent. That is a separate story. We are talking about the archetypal father principle as an inner quality that every man must build within himself. What is logos? If the mother's world is an ocean, the father's world is a lighthouse. If eros is connection, logos is structure. If the mother's world is unconditional acceptance, the father's world is law and order. Logos is boundaries. It is the ability to say no to what destroys you and yes to what leads to your goal. Logos is discipline. It is the ability to do what must be done regardless of whether you feel like it or not. Logos is purpose. It is a vector directed toward the outer world, a mission bigger than yourself. And finally, logos is meaning. It is your personal answer to the question, why do I live? And that answer cannot sound like, to make her happy. Shikim. And here is the main law of psychological maturation. A man becomes a man only when his main source of meaning lies outside the sphere of relationships and outside a woman's approval. His work, his vocation, his service to the world, his spiritual quest, his creativity, anything. But it must be his own sun around which his life revolves. In such a system, the woman becomes not the sun, but the beloved planet, a companion on the journey to the sun. As long as a man seeks meaning in a woman, he remains a son. When he brings his meaning to a woman, he becomes a man. Ethan's task, and your task, is not to run away from the maternal world, but to build within yourself the father principle that balances it. To build an inner spine that allows you to stand upright rather than cling to her in search of support. But how do you build this inner lighthouse? How do you cultivate this father principle within yourself? It is built not from reflections, but from small daily acts of psychological sovereignty. This is not advice about what to do with your woman. This is an instruction for building yourself. Here are 4 foundational stones. First, the act of boundary. Learn to say no without guilt. For a man captured by the mother complex, the word no feels like an act of aggression, like betrayal. In reality, it is an act of self-respect. Start small. When you are asked for something that depletes you or contradicts your plans, do not answer immediately. Take a pause, ask yourself, am I doing this out of love and generosity or out of fear and guilt? If the answer is the latter, say no. Calmly, firmly, without long apologies. Each such no is a brick in the wall of your personal boundaries. It is a statement to the world. My energy belongs to me, and I decide how to use it. Second, the act of mission. Define your purpose. This is the most important thing. Starting today, find one thing that belongs only to you. It can be anything. Learning a new language, creating a YouTube channel, working out at the gym, writing a book, a volunteer project. The main condition, this goal must not serve your relationship. It must not be aimed at impressing her or earning more money for her. It must be the work of your soul. Devote at least 3 to 4 hours a week to this. This time is sacred. This is the time when you serve not her, but your inner genius, your logos. Third, the act of space. Create your territory. Every man must have a space where a woman has no access. It can be a real place, a garage, an office, a corner in a room, or it can be time. For example, an hour every evening when you read alone and cannot be disturbed. This is not selfishness. It is a vital necessity. It is a symbolic place where you meet yourself, where you are not a husband, not a partner, not a father, but simply you. Your soul is not a public park. Learn to put up a fence and close the gate when necessary. Fourth, the act of mystery. Stop sharing everything. In a culture of total openness, this sounds like heresy. But a man captured by the mother complex uses confession as a way to shrug off responsibility. He hands over to the woman all his doubts, fears, and hopes, making her the container for his soul. Stop. Keep part of your inner world to yourself. Carry your problems, your decisions, and your victories within yourself for a while. Feel their weight. This is not about secrets and deceit. It is about cultivating inner depth and self-sufficiency. These 4 acts are not quick fixes. They are daily practice. They are the slow but sure construction of your inner father. These steps, saying no, finding your mission, creating your space, may seem small, almost selfish. But understand, behind them stands a great transformation. And the catalyst for this transformation, paradoxically, is precisely the pain you so desperately want to get rid of. I am talking about criticism, about constant dissatisfaction, about that disappointed look you catch on yourself. You spend all your energy trying to avoid this, to finally earn her approval and peace. And every time this fails, you hear a verdict inside. I am a bad husband. I am a loser. I am not good enough. And now I ask you to hear the most important, most liberating truth of this video. Your woman's criticism and dissatisfaction are not your failure. They are an alarm signal. You hear her words, but it is not quite her speaking. It is your own soul tired of imprisonment in the dungeon of the good boy, sounding the alarm through her. Your woman, without knowing it, has become the voice of your unrealized potential, the voice of the hero who is suffocating inside. And this voice is shouting 3 words at you, 3 great imperatives of the masculine spirit. Be born. Be born from the psychological womb of the mother complex, where it is so warm, safe, and deadly boring. Separate. Separate your self-esteem from her mood. Separate your life path from her approval. Become a separate continent, not her coastal island. Become who you must be, not who she, as you imagine, wants you to be. This is the most painful and most valuable invitation of your life. Painful because it requires you to face your main fear, the fear of being rejected if you stop being convenient, but also the most valuable, because beyond this fear lies everything you truly want: self-respect, inner strength, and, strangely enough, her genuine respect and desire. A woman cannot truly respect and desire a son. She can respect and desire only a man who is her equal. Therefore, next time you hear a reproach, do not rush to defend yourself or apologize. Stop and listen to what sounds behind her words. It is a call. Her dissatisfaction is not a wall you have run into. It is a door your own soul is asking you to finally open. So, we have traveled a long road with Ethan, descending from the paradise of his illusions into the cold reality of his kitchen, and then into the deepest archives of his soul. And now, standing here at the summit of our analysis, we can formulate the main law behind his story and the stories of thousands of other men. We began this investigation with the question, why do you lose yourself in relationships? And the superficial answer, flattering to our ego, sounds like this: because I love too much, because I am too generous. But now, after this psychological autopsy, we know the truth. For a man, losing himself in relationships is not an act of love. It is a symptom of incomplete psychological separation from the maternal archetype. It is not generosity, it is escape, an escape from the main masculine task, to find your own center of gravity, your own source of meaning. A man who has not built his inner logos, his backbone, will desperately try to lean on a woman. He makes her his center, his mission, his meaning. And by doing so, he places on her a burden that no mortal can bear, the burden of being God. He asks her to be at once his beloved, his mother, and his purpose in life. And of course, she collapses under this weight, turning from goddess into tyrant. And that is why true, adult, passionate love for a woman becomes possible only under one condition. It is possible only when a man finds his own source of meaning and power, independent of her. First, you must marry your soul, your mission, your calling. You must build your temple in which you are the high priest. And only then, having become whole, having become the center of your own universe, can you invite a woman into it, not as a savior, but as an equal. Not as a mother, but as a beloved. And when a man embarks on this path, everything changes. He changes himself. And as if by magic, his relationship changes because he changes the very law of its gravity. Imagine a future for Ethan who has walked this path. Imagine a relationship not as the merging of two halves into a whole, but as a union of two sovereign states. It is a union where there are two centers, two worlds, two universes that touch but do not engulf each other. They are like two columns that support the vault of a single temple. It is precisely the distance between them, their separateness, that creates the sacred space we call love. If the columns fuse, the temple collapses. In such a relationship, admiration is born not from service, but from respect. A woman begins to admire not how well he guesses her desires, but how he follows his own path. His devotion to his mission, his fidelity to his inner law become the most powerful aphrodisiac. His separateness is what makes him desirable. And then a great miracle occurs. The woman is given permission to stop being a mommy. She no longer needs to control, direct, and inspire him because he has his own engine. She can relax. She can again become a woman, not the manager of his life. And then love ceases to be a desperate attempt to fill an inner void and becomes a free dance of two fires, each burning with its own unique flame. They do not merge, they illuminate and warm each other, making the shared light brighter. I want to thank you. Thank you not for watching, but for walking this path to the end. This was not just an hour of information. For many of you, it was inner work requiring honesty and courage. It takes real bravery not to turn away from your reflection in Ethan's story, to listen to uncomfortable questions, and to look into those corners of the soul we usually fear to face. If during this hour you felt pain, shame, or discomfort, know this is not a sign of your weakness. On the contrary, it is a sign that your soul is alive and demands growth. You are on the path of a great and difficult journey towards psychological maturity. This path is not your unique problem. It is a universal male initiation. It is the battle every hero fought in every myth, the battle for separation from the devouring world of the mother to find his own law, his logos. Your personal battle is a fragment of the great eternal story of the becoming of the masculine spirit. And the fact that you are here, that you are seeking answers, means that you have taken part in it. You did not evade this call, and that alone deserves the deepest respect. Our investigation today has come to an end, but your personal journey is only beginning. If this hour, this deep dive was valuable to you, if you felt that you received a real map and not just another piece of advice, then the best gratitude will be your support. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next psychological expeditions into the most important topics of our lives. Click the bell to always stay informed. Your like is not just a number, it is a signal to complex algorithms that this kind of depth is needed by other seekers wandering in the dark. Remember that this is only one chapter in a big book. If today we diagnose the wound inflicted by the negative mother complex, then in our other videos we will explore how to heal it, how to meet your shadow, how to find an ally in your inner woman, the anima, and how in practice to build that very father principle, which is the key to your strength. All this awaits you on the channel. And in conclusion, when you close this window and return to your life, I ask you to take with you not just information, but one main decision, one thought that should become your compass. Remember, your main battle is not for her love, it is for your soul. Begin it today.